We come now to the MCU film that I think most fans would agree is probably the weakest point in not only the Thor trilogy, but the MCU as a whole. The film had shuffled around directors a couple of times before settling on Alan Taylor, who was well known for his work on TV shows like Game of Thrones and Mad Men. In addition, Avengers director Joss Whedon came in to rewrite some scenes for the film, which mainly featured Loki, and helped flesh the character out more, but mostly stood out for being separated from the rest of the film, and very much seemed like Joss material compared to the writing in the rest of the film. I do think that there is fun to be had with Thor: The Dark World, but it is definitely one of the more generic films in the MCU, and definitely feels more pointless. To say if you took this film out of the continuity of the MCU, I don't think anyone would really be missing it. It's definitely disappointing because this is the first film in the MCU where we really get reference to the Infinity Stones. Yes, we have the Tesseract and Loki's staff in the previous films. This is the first time we've actually heard the word Infinity Stones being used. Thor: The Dark World suffers from trying to cram too many different ideas into the one film, where you have the opening which feels like you're watching an episode of Game of Thrones or a Lord of the Rings film, which is great, and I think it's a tone I think the movie should have made consistent throughout, as we've now expanded from the first Shakespearean take with the first Thor, and now we can dive deeper into the lore and myth of the Thor world. But this movie has to tie into the shared universe and gets dragged down back to Earth, where we're continuing the adventures of Jane Foster and crew, and very much kills that Game of Thrones vibe that you get from earlier scenes. In addition, we're introduced to a cosmic threat in the form of Malekith and the Dark Elves, which introduces a heavy science fiction element to the film. So you just get left with a film that doesn't really know what to focus on, and really leaves you wishing that one direction was chosen rather than trying to incorporate so much. As I said, I think there is some good in Thor: The Dark World. The movie absolutely lives and dies by Loki and Tom Hiddleston, where he's facing the repercussions for his actions during the Avengers. We get to see Loki very much broken and beaten down, while also getting the nuggets of his transformation from full-blown villain to anti-hero, where in Thor Ragnarok, he becomes straight up ally to Thor. Chris Hemsworth does the best with what he's given this time around. Some of the dialogue he has feels very stilted and forced, but it does still look like he's having fun with the role and slowly evolving to the more comedic version of the character that we got in later films. Natalie Portman just really doesn't feel like she fits in this movie. Jane Foster really doesn't have a whole lot to do in the movie other than act as a vessel for the Aether, which is this film's MacGuffin, and really just feels like the equivalent of R2-D2, where the MacGuffin has just become a character. She spends a lot of the movie just kind of being there, and no one is buying the romance between her and Thor. In fact, if this movie had just stayed off Earth and avoided Kat Dennings and Stellan Skarsgård, I think it would have had a far more consistent and interesting film, which of course was the lesson that was applied to Thor Ragnarok. The villain is also completely forgettable. Christopher Eccleston barely says anything and exists to really just be a punching bag for Thor. There's never really any menace with Malekith. It's like the film is trying its best to skip past the stuff with the villain to get you back to the Thor and Loki drama. It's certainly telling if your previous film's villain was more interesting than your current film's villain. If that happens, you may want to go back to the drawing board. In addition, you have the Dark Elves, which while they have a really sweet design and awesome spaceships, they are just the faceless putty men that Thor can just tear through without any real worry for loss of human life. This movie just lacks any real clear focus, and I've always felt that that's a result of all the different voices chiming in, and Alan Taylor was just expected to kind of put it all together and somehow make it work. There are still some really fun action moments though, like the Dark Elves attack on Asgard, which has a lot of really fun spectacle and action. Although the death of Thor's mother is something that never really resonated with me. We never really spend a great deal with her, and so don't really know her all that well in both films, as the movies are more focused on Odin, Thor, and Loki. So when she does die, the only real sense of loss that we get is of Loki's reaction to her death. Other than that, it's not really a character that I was ever yearning to see again. Strangely enough, although the movie is called The Dark World, we don't really get to spend a great deal of time at the actual Dark World. Not to mention the visuals are all pretty unappealing and very murky. The idea of the film being set around the convergence of the 9 realms is really interesting, although it just feels like something made for convenience so that Jane Foster can teleport people to other realms with a contraption that just services the plot. It feels very underdeveloped and unfocused. Again, I think if this film had stuck to the Game of Thrones vibe that it had going for it at the beginning, I think you really could have ended up with a fun, entertaining epic that just happened to be set in the MCU. The Dark World is a disappointment even if there are inklings of enjoyment to be had. Thor: The Dark World gets a 5.5 out of 10 from me. Guys, I hope you like this review. There'll be more MCU reviews coming soon as we lead up to the release of Avengers Infinity War, so stay tuned for Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I'm really looking forward to that one. So stay right here for your Mono Fix. Bye guys.